Hello.
Hello. Uh-oh. Hello, Brian.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you great. I can hear you great. I was cutting you off.
Okay. There's no. Is there an? I'm so audio sensitive.
I know. I feel bad. No, you were saying hello, Adam. I cut you off.
Okay.
I didn't know how we were going to get out of that situation. It just felt like we were going to be stuck there for a while.
Okay, good. We're not stuck.
Yeah.
We're back after a little hiatus. We had a couple weeks off here, so
Yeah.
a little bit of summer vacations, but it's good to be back. We're back, and we're being trolled by the internet again. Instantly trolled, and I feel like as we kind of think of like the buckets for Oxide and Friends episodes, we got like our hot takes. We got kind of our quarterly hot takes, maybe a little more frequently than that. They're not as frequently as monthly. I don't think. I think we spare people from that, but we do have our occasional hot takes, and today is a hot take episode. But I pledge, I have listened. Have you listened to any of our previous hot takes?
Yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And the ones you call hot takes, I call Brian gets trolled on Twitter, but potato.
Fine. But we both know the fundamental problem with this. It's like, can you read the tweet, please, you moron? Can you please?
That's right.
Can someone please read the tweet so we know what we're talking about? When folks that are, I feel sorry for the poor folks that are trying to consume this as a podcast. Like, I do not know what we're talking about. Can someone please read the entire tweet that we're angry about? So I want
just some part of it. Like, that'd be a good start. I don't know.
Just a part of it. So now, unfortunately, because Elon Musk has flown this thing into the sun, he now allows like blog entries as tweets.
My God.
So
yeah.
There's like no upper bound on and we have here an essay, and I do think we have to read it in its entirety. I think it'd be a mistake to not read this in its entirety. Now, okay, but I've got some questions for you about like protocol before we get going.
Yeah.
There are many there's several mistakes in here, and then there are many things that we've got commentary on, but we have to reserve that commentary. Obviously, I'm speaking to myself here. I'm obviously not speaking.
You think you can read through all of these 7 or 8 paragraphs with no commentary?
Okay. No, I don't think I can. What if I offer? Here, I'm just concerned. This is how we end up in the situation. If I offer, and already someone is listening to this on the podcast being like, you guys
read the tweet. Why are they not reading the tweet?
Are they having a debate about how they're going to read the tweet? And it's like, if you pre-rage before you read the tweet, that's going to be the whole podcast, you idiots, and you're never going to read the tweet. So I also I would like to say, just to also channel you in terms of, I like to channel your criticisms of me to like get in front of them a little bit, debang them a little bit. And I also feel that I think that you would be right. I tweeted this out today, despite my best attempts to resist talking about this. I'm giving into the temptation of talking about it. I feel like you'd be right to be like, your best attempts to resist.
I mean, I did. Of course, I'm sure even as you wrote that, you could hear me saying, really, that's best effort for you?
Name 5 things you did. You know what? Actually name 3. Name 2, actually. Just name 2. Name 2 things that you did to resist talking about this. I don't think you are resisting talking about it.
So tell you what, why don't you read?
I think you're desperate to talk about it.
That's right. Why don't you read as many paragraphs as you can, and then I think we could take a break. I think it'd be safe to take a break for some commentary, as long as we promise to listeners that we'll get back to it.
So here's what I'm going to do. No, instead of that, I am going to read through the whole thing.
Okay.
I am going. You would appreciate this. My 17-year-old, who is definitely, God bless the kid, but I definitely got a little bit too much of my own genetic material through on that one. And his counter argument to any argument I might have about literally anything is to repeat exactly what I just said, but sound like a complete idiot. It's like, we should take the car today. It's like, no, okay, that's not a counter argument. That's just you're just now saying this. This is just mocking me. And he also loves to do an impersonation of me that you would find that just kills with the rest of the family. So the other thing he likes to do is repeat exactly the argument that I've made, but impersonating me. in a way that just leaves everyone else howling. And I'm like, this is
God. We've got to have him in for the next OxCon to just like deliver the keynote for the internal crowd. Man, it would slay. God.
A kid. So I'm going to try to read this earnestly. What I'm trying to say is I'm not going to adopt his technique. I'm going to try to read this earnestly.
You're not going to read it in the voice of him pretending to be you, an idiot.
I'm not going to do that. But in order to do that, the one thing does the capitalization bother you at all? So this person has spelled NVIDIA with a solitary capital V, lowercase n, capital V, lowercase the rest. And this is not correct. And I acknowledge that NVIDIA is a strangely named company that seems to be inconsistent about their own capitalization. And, it seems to, in many places, be in all caps as kind of a brand, which is how I've always spelled it. But you also see a capital N, lowercase Vidya, but you never see it like lowercase n, capital V. Come on, that's not it.
Well, it didn't, because I thought that like way back in the day that was their branding, like in buying graphics cards from them.
So maybe there's got to be something. Because he is not the only person I've seen do this. So, all right, I'm going to read this thing.
Let's do it.
Good luck to us all. This is from Robert Graham, X, Errata Rob. Says NVIDIA is in the same position as Sun Microsystems was in the early days of the Dotcom bubble. Sun had the leading edge web servers, the smartest engineers. Okay, we can agree on that point. No, sorry. I'm doing it again. The smartest engineers, the most respect in the industry. If you were .com startup, you bought Sun servers. Smart engineers wouldn't come work for your startup if you were dumb enough not to buy Sun servers. And they charged a premium. Their profits went through the roof. Except, well, there wasn't anything actually special about them. They weren't actually the best. Nothing really was. It's just that they were the least risky option. You knew they'd work, that newly hired employees would be familiar with them, that they were good enough. As a startup, you don't optimize for the efficiency of your systems. You optimize for building a business, like selling pet food, doing auctions, selling books online, and so on. You want growth, not profits. Once you've dominated the market and have steady revenue, you can afford to go back and fix the efficiency problems. It's funny because back in 1996, Windows NT 4 running on Pentium Pro was a vastly better web server than Sun. It's just that Silicon Valley startups couldn't find anybody who knew the system. Techies looked down on Windows and considered it a, quote, toy operating system compared to the mighty Solaris. And Intel CPUs were CISC when everyone knew RISC was better. Everybody was wrong, of course. NVIDIA is in the same position. Everybody wants NVIDIA chips for AI because they are known to work. The techies know how to program for them and so on. But Intel, AMD, and others make competitive chips for part or all of the AI stack that cost a lots less. Indeed, Apple's own chips are quite good. Their private cloud could, in theory, be serviced by racks of Mac Ultra servers, but they probably are buying NVIDIA too. When the .com bubble burst, Sun crashed and never recovered. Right now, VCs are throwing vast amounts of money at startups who are in turn sending it to NVIDIA. At some point, this will stop. Unsuccessful startups will go bankrupt and sell NVIDIA hardware and office chairs on eBay. Successful companies will now work to attain profitability by reducing costs.
Bravo.
I did it.
That was really impressive. Really impressive.
I think that is impressive. I only coughed once. I think it was really impressive.
Yeah.
And as with many things, I realized, of course, I didn't actually read every word of this thing. And there were definitely there's even more to be said about this. So one is like, I definitely miss the character limit. I think the character limit is an important part of
that's right. Like saying things in as few words as possible is the soul of wit.
It is. Yeah. One might say. I don't have another way of phrasing that, but if I did. Right. Who actually said that brevity is the soul of wit? Is that an E.B. White-ism? I feel like
I don't know.
Okay. So I saw this because apparently, Adam, you and I are the keepers of the flame for Sun Microsystems. I mean,
that's right.
I just got tagged by a lot of folks about like, okay, anything Sun, I'm like the the living fossil. And despite the fact that like I was at Sun for 14 years. You were at Sun for a decade, right?
Yep.
And Sun was a very established company when I came there in 1996. I mean, I was, my badge number is 30,992.
Oh, yeah.
But we were there for the back half. So, definitely saw plenty and certainly happy to, there's plenty in this that is not going to resonate with our own experience. So that's the tweet. I do wonder if people listen to the podcast are like, you know what? On second thought, go back to not reading the tweet. Actually, I think I kind of preferred it when you guys weren't reading the tweet. I think it was. There's a lot in here that is a very strange read of history, and I want to kind of get to a bunch of different pieces of it. What kind of struck you here reading this?
Man, so a couple of pieces. I think at the jump, the implication that the .com bubble is like a reading on the AI bubble, which I think is pretty far off. I think that's maybe a reasonable place to start.
Is the kind of this AI boom looks a lot like the .com boom, and I mean there are obviously some commonalities, but it feels like there are a lot of differences too. It sounds like you feel the same differences.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know. Even at the time, it felt like a bubble, like things didn't make sense on their face, and then just like the outcomes of AI are very exciting and real. I think that I think we're both pretty excited about the prospects here, and they seem very tangible. But then when it comes to NVIDIA, it just doesn't seem like the same lessons could conceivably apply. Like even if it turns out that there is this big contraction associated with AI, that the money going into it, it feels like NVIDIA has like a lot of leads when it comes to the general properties of accelerated compute for AI, but for other stuff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I just to put it out there, I do not think that Sun was never as dominant as NVIDIA is right now. I mean, I just don't think.
Yeah. That's another great point in here, which was the implication that that folks were buying Sun systems and could only buy Sun systems, but there was never this shortage. I don't think there was never this thought of like, who is going to get the next allocation of Sun systems. I think Sun was making them pretty quickly, but it wasn't like, well, there's only enough to feed this teeny fragment of the market, which is what it feels like with NVIDIA right now.
Yes, that's right. And I think that the kind of the lead in on this is a bit suspect, just because Sun never felt as dominant as NVIDIA is now. And Sun had kind of the leading edge web servers. It's like, well, it's a lot more than serving the web. I mean, that we had I remember it would be like the 1999 all hands when Greg Papadopoulos got up in front of the company and said the three most important applications for Sun are databases. So I actually think that like the database boom was every bit as important as the web server boom for kind of the .com era. That kind of is kind of rickety. I don't really buy that. And then you're like getting into the Windows NT 4 running on a Pentium Pro was a vastly better web server than Sun in 1986. It's like, no, sorry. So for a bunch of reasons. I mean, I think that like that kind of ignores the fact that x86 passed the RISC manufacturers with respect to clock speed. It did not happen in 1996. It happened quite a bit later than that, and it was happening as we got into the late 90s for sure. And then with the .com bust, then clearly x86 was ahead of not just Spark, but more or less every other RISC vendor, maybe with the possible exception of Power. But the idea that I mean, in many ways, that read on history is super, super strange, because in 1996 in particular, and I remember that year vividly because it's the year that I went to go work for Sun. Really, this is before yes, the .com boom starts in probably 1993. It starts growing 1993. The Netscape IPO kind of kicks things off, but it is not like full throttle in
No,
1996.
no.
That would come quite a few years later. That would come in like 97, 98, 99,
Yeah.
2000. And it was still true in 1996, and I would say into 1997, that Unix was viewed as antiquarian and that everybody felt that Windows NT was the future. So I mean, this kind of read on history is exactly wrong, in that Windows was actually viewed as being completely dominant in the mid 90s. And I remember the NT, that anytime there was any kind of criticism of Windows, it was always coming in NT5. NT5 was one of these great vaporware releases, and all the computer manufacturers had abandoned their Unix variant. I mean, they had their Unix variant, but this is kind of very, very infamously when SGI, which had been one of the real Unix innovators, they start moving to Windows in 96, 97.
And DEC
And
too,
it was,
right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, that was really not, and then it was really only when the internet really begins to take off, and it's because Windows is a crappy web server, and it's because Windows isn't actually good at these internet workloads. It's not good at database workloads at that time. Not good, very much, still having kind of residues of that personal computer heritage. And it was because Unix was the model that very much the model that grew up with the internet. It was the model the internet wanted, and Sun was Unix central. Sun had made the bet on Unix and on SMP Unix in particular at a time when many of the people had walked away from it. So the boom at Sun is actually it is exactly opposite of what's being claimed here, I think.
Yeah. Well, we're certainly in that mid 90s era. It did feel like Windows NT was, the hype of it was like almost insurmountable. Like it was the answer regardless of the question. And I think then in maybe 97, it started to come down, as you're saying, as people got more experience on it, more miles on those tires.
Yeah, and I think began to realize that, I've always viewed that one of those turning points was this thing called Scalability Day. And because what the thing that had been that the criticism of Microsoft had been its lack of scale. So they decided, like, okay, we're going to, and actually Jim Gray led this, like, we're going to have this great demonstration of the scalability of Windows, but they did it in a very rigged fashion. It was a kind of an embarrassingly parallel workload that they had across many, many machines. And it wasn't actually that interesting. It was, it was not, and it kind of actually, it's one of the dangers of overshooting. It put a spotlight on the fact that in the narrative, like even in the Wall Street Journal, I remember, because this is in 1997, May of 1997, if memory serves. And even the Wall Street Journal was like, okay, this is actually kind of revealing that there's not a there for Microsoft. And that, to me, I was viewed as a bit of a turning point when people began to realize, like, well, actually, maybe these Sun servers are, maybe this is what actually makes sense. And even SGI was realizing that, like, okay, we actually, we're trying to kind of have a foot in both camps here, and that's where things really begin to take off. Up until then, it was very, very suffocating. And I mean, ironically, from a period of like dominance to lost dominance, Microsoft felt absolutely dominant in that era. Leading up to, say, like 92 to 97, it felt like the future of everything was Microsoft and was very proprietary. And that actually does feel a bit like NVIDIA, honestly. I think that NVIDIA is executing better than Microsoft was executing then. I think NVIDIA is executing broadly really well. But so, I mean, I think that the kind of that bit of the narrative is super weird. And I mean, the replies to this tweet were like, that is a very strange read of history.
Did you see the one where he said, I mean, IO completion queues? I mean, that's
completion
why.
That was right. So
what a strange way to try to win an argument. I don't know. It just felt like that's not the trump card you've been holding on to, is it?
That was a very bizarre, and it's like, okay, look, like Windows NT had IO completion ports, absolutely, and which is great. And this is, all operating systems developed this kind of ability to support this kind of asynchrony. And unfortunately, everyone did it slightly differently. And you had kind of K event from BSDs, and you had we did event ports in Solaris, now Lumos, and NT had IO completion ports, and then of course Linux did ePOL. But that's a very inside baseball feature to cite. So it really so that bit is like that's bizarre. And I think that the other thing that was like bizarre is that the whole like CISC versus RISC thing was I just
wanted to ask about that because I feel like I am the last RISC dead ender, and I'm sure that's not the case, but I think because I spent so much time with the Spark instruction set, like decoding it in my brain, that I just fell in love with RISC.
Yeah, I think you're a RISC dead ender because you want to go modify everyone's address space. You want to go modify a bunch of program text, and like
exactly.
Of course, you're just talking your book with RISC.
That's right. That's right. But I'm glad that trolled you at least some, maybe not as much, or maybe this is just you're giving me a little present here because you know how much I love RISC secretly.
Oh, listen, we all love RISC. I mean, I think the thing that is funny about RISC is, I definitely love RISC, and then every RISC instruction set, which I guess is a redundancy, but every specific ISA had its own little like very, for something that putatively was about the elegance of the thing. There were some seriously hairy warts on basically every one of them. Every instruction set. And I guess you're not gonna get. I do love. I think you and I both love RISC-V.
Did you see? Tying in with another episode, there's a RISC-V motherboard for the framework laptop. So
really, wow, this is that's that. Does it run anything? What do you run on it?
Hey,
do you run Linux on it?
Oh, you could say the same thing about my Tadpole laptop with its Spark processor, I guess.
Right. Like, look, running things on it is not a constraint on the problem. So yeah, that's kind of wild.
Yeah.
I do love lots of elements of RISC-V. I think they've done a very good job on the engineering of the instruction set of RISC-V.
Yeah.
And because I think they've really tried. I think kind of the CISC versus RISC debates were. I think that is a bit of a false dichotomy. I mean, yes, that existed, but Intel had kind of figured out the instruction decode in the kind of mid 90s, getting into the late 90s. In order for x86 to surpass RISC performance, they had to basically decode it internally into effectively RISC instructions that they're executing. So, and then they've got big caches of decoded instructions because this is what we would always joke about, like ASCII add before multiply is kind of my poor whipping boy for the ridiculousness of CISC. And you could just see in every passing generation that would take more and more cycles. And ASCII add before multiply is actually, you know what? It's an instruction I've never used. For all of my abuse of ASCII add before multiply, I almost want to speak out on ASCII add before multiply's defense. Be like, hey, you know what? Why don't you execute this instruction before you knock it? You might like it.
You should do it. I would throw up, get that ASM macro and give it a shot. See how it goes.
I might. Yeah. I just might. And this is for the binary encoded decimal support. That's a crazy legacy in x86. And it still works, but at every generation that would take more and more cycles because who cares about the performance of the stuff? In fact, you want to decode that into smaller micro ops that you can then optimize. So RISC won in that regard, in that's the implementation of Intel as well, and just the implementation of x86 under the hood. But yeah, I thought that was a little bit ridiculous. And then of course, like everybody was wrong. Of course, like everybody was wrong about what? Everybody
just in general. Right.
Just in general, I think on this particular point, like actually, like you're wrong. Honestly, like everyone else is kind of right. So, and then the other thing that was just super surprising, if you want to talk about kind of the end of that dominance of Sun, such as it was, and again, nowhere near as dominant as NVIDIA. It was x86 and the performance of x86, and then the availability of open source operating systems on x86, Linux specifically. That's what because what people wanted was like fast Unix, and fast Unix was Solaris on Spark for a period of time, and then it was not Solaris on Spark.
Right.
And you and I were both in a bad relationship with Spark. I think is that fair to say? We needed to.
Well, how dare you? Yeah, I mean, yes, I think that's right. Well, actually, we got out of that relationship, with the Fishworks box.
We did.
We
did get out of that relationship. And you know what? It was better for Spark that we got out of that relationship. It was better for Spark that it needed to go. It needed to figure some things out. Spark had some problems.
That's right. We weren't mad. We were just disappointed.
We were disappointed. It was not good. Spark was what. There were other ideas that Spark was experimenting with that were very important. I do think that it does kind of get into one of the challenges that Sun had, because Sun was nowhere near as dominant as NVIDIA, but things were going well for Sun for those, what feels like a very brief period of time. I feel when things are going, one of the things that I learned because Adam, you interned in 2000.
2000, that's right.
Right. And then you
interned, arguably at the height. It must have been totally a height. Just quick anecdote. Me and my other intern, we were almost unhoused. We could not find an apartment. We were squatting in one buddy's from college who had an apartment. We had to have my folks co-sign and have some whole power of attorney craziness to just we were one day away from sleeping in our office.
Couch it in modern terms, getting an apartment in Silicon Valley in 2000 was like getting a GPU today.
That's right.
You just it can't be had for love or money. You can't even. And especially you've got this kind of temporary housing. And I guess was Sun didn't set you. Or Sun was trying to set you up. Were they?
No, I don't. It is vexing to me that Sun didn't. My other buddies who were interns at the same time, but no, Sun couldn't figure out where to put us other than under our desks.
Under your desks. So where did you end up? I guess I don't think I.
we squatted in one buddy's place.
Sufficient concern
we were
where you were spending every night.
We were one buddy had a month of overlap, so we had mattresses and lamps that we had borrowed from work, and then we got some corporate housing that they were very reluctant to rent to us for just 2 months.
So that is 2000.
That's 2000.
It is go-go times in Silicon Valley. And then you go back to school and you graduate in 2001. And then you come out in 2001 and the world has changed.
Yeah. So while I was a summer intern in 2000, I just wanted to know, one of our shared professors from Brown was at a startup and tried to get me and Pete, the other intern, to drop out of school to join his startup. That's how kind of bananas it was. I don't think I ever told you that.
Right. You mentioned that and I had forgotten. I think I encouraged you to return to school is what I would like.
Yeah. I think that would have. I think I mentioned that to him again recently, and he apologized because that is borderline child abuse.
Borderline child abuse. I know it feels like that. That feels like a bit of a crime.
So then returned to Sun, and I think they gave me some stock options for my internship priced at the time of my internship. So at 50. And nice. The recruiter did explain to me that those would actually probably be more valuable. Bear with him, because usually you could just depend on stock options doubling in value over 2 years. So if they started at 50 and they doubled in value, and I really did not sound right to me. I felt like there was some sort of fallacy in there.
Right. I can't put my finger on it, but I don't know. You seem to know what you're talking about. So doubling in value.
He was a professional, so. But
it did not double in value.
No. To see,
so this actually gets to one immediate, because this is actually one of the things I wanted to talk about. There's a lot that's wrong with the street, but I also did want to talk about booms and busts, dominance, the rise of dominance and the fall of dominance. Because I think in tech, we do see this more. You have this kind of rise to absolute dominance, and then companies fade again, and more so, I think, than in other domains. Not exclusively, but you think you look at aircraft manufacturers there have been startups, but basically the same. auto manufacturers. There have been startups, and I guess Tesla would be a counterexample of this, but like basically the same. And in tech, like we've companies that literally did not exist become absolutely dominant and then cease to exist again in the span of like 30 and 40 years, which is a really compressed time frame.
Yeah.
And so there are all sorts of different aspects of that, but you're hitting on one of them that I wanted to hit on, which is for a public company, there is a valuation that it has built into it future expectations. And the valuation is like, can be ludicrous. And there were like the valuations in the dot-com boom were ludicrous. And there was absolutely no way, even if things went well, there was no, and I do think that is a parallel with, I think this is a real challenge that NVIDIA's got, is the valuation is really, really steep. It's like how surely NVIDIA interns are being told the same thing, that like, don't worry, the stock's going to double. And it's like, is that right? Like, is the stock going to double? Because like, it's already, that's, wow, that would be, and I think that the stock has been on a kind of on a bit of a slide, because it's like the market cap right now is like close to $3 trillion. Is it going to be a $6 trillion company? Is it going to be a $100 trillion company? If you listen to the Acquired episodes, yes. You and I are both fans of Acquired. I love Acquired.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You listened to the interview with Jensen?
I did. And it's like, they're great. And everybody.
In a man after your own heart, he has over 40 direct reports.
He is a man after my own heart. I do love the 40 direct reports. There's so much I actually do love about NVIDIA. And okay, look, I do love the 40 direct reports. I also, and this has been kind of quiet, that there have been a couple of companies that have been very loud. Many companies have been very loud about the return to the office mandate. Less loud have been those companies that do not have those mandates. And those companies include NVIDIA. And, whether it's the most valuable company on earth right now, or it's definitely up there. But the fact that so people are kind of looking around at all these other companies being like, oh, everyone's doing a return to the office mandate. It's like, not everybody, actually. And I know, Adam, we believe very strongly in the power of remote work. And it's kind of interesting. There are a lot of these beliefs that people look at Oxide as being totally iconoclastic. It's like, well, also, like, by the way, the most valuable company on earth also agrees with this. So it's like, can't be that weird. It's not that strange to have 41 reports. Please, I'm not a freak show over here. So yes, it's there are a lot of things that I really like about it, but it's very hard to imagine how that doubles in value. And you look at, and I think this is still true, that if you look at Cisco, which is Cisco, unlike Sun, Cisco did not perish, right? And Cisco,
right.
Cisco has not gotten close. What is right now, just looking at it, it is closer than it's been in a long time, but it is not at its valuation from 2000, from its peak valuation in like that summer of 2000, when you could not get your apartment, Adam. It was at like that exact moment you should have sold all of your Cisco shares.
Yeah.
But it's kind of wild to think that like it is still, you could be at Cisco for 25 years, and a company that's like not a mess, right? And is like has done well commercially.
Yeah. And like arguably important even, right? Like both in terms of what they've done and the acquisitions they've made and all that, and to not get back to that threshold of 2000 is remarkable.
Isn't that crazy? And which I think shows you that like you can have, and I think they were blessed by kind of this crash, which allows them, in some ways, like what you don't want is like the kind of the slow drain or the slow bleed, because whether we like it or not, the price of the equity does affect the way people think of the company.
So while we're alluding to like some of my questionable financial decisions, I just want to share, do you know who one of the early investors in NVIDIA was?
No. Oh, no.
So Sutter Hill, where I was in EIR. And there was a lot of water cooler talk when I was there in 2016 about how, they were about to kill it and so forth. I didn't really pay too much attention to it. But I was getting, some like I didn't commit insider trading. What I'm saying is there was a lot of encouragement to do things that might have been regarded as insider trading, and that would have been a good investment. Turns out
to
buy NVIDIA in 2016.
To buy NVIDIA in 2016, yes, that would have been a good investment. I mean, it's So I can't tell if that's a confession or like an anti-confession. What was that? Was that something?
It was just like everyone else was talking about how they were going to kill this thing, and I wasn't paying too much attention, and I thought, graphics card company, I guess, or whatever. Not
when you said
sort
kill,
of thinking,
I think I'm misunderstanding the verb kill in this sentence.
Oh, do well.
Okay. Yes, that explains it. Yes, so everyone. This is NVIDIA is going to kill it, and NVIDIA is going. They're not going to kill NVIDia. Yeah, right. No, it would have been. Yeah, that would have been. That would have been good. I'm sure there's been no bad tips that have happened in those halls.
That's probably true.
There are no zeros at Sutter Hill. There are only winners.
That's right.
I'm sure they don't bury their. But I mean, you look. I mean, and Microsoft has had a real resurgence, obviously under Satya Nadella, but Microsoft also peaked in 2000 and was flat for years and years and years and years and years. And it's like that when equity is a huge component of compensation, and compensation is why people are at a company. And I'm not accusing NVIDIA of that. I don't necessarily think that's necessarily the case, but I think that there have been other companies where, the comp is, the expectation is that the equity is going to increase in value because that's a significant portion of your compensation. When the stock is kind of a mess, it can be a downer for morale. It was a downer at Sun for morale. I mean, we did work for a public company that lost 98% of its value. So, that's a thing. That's a downer.
It's a bit of a bummer. Yeah.
It's a bit of a bummer. And I kind of think, do you also remember when things actually do begin to unspool, you get the floors that people create for themselves. Like, it can't go below 40. It's like, well, okay, like, why not? Well, no, because it's like, obviously it can't go below 40. It's like, this is not, this can definitely go below 40.
Yeah. I mean, I think people were saying, it can't go below the cash we have in the bank, but that turned out to not be a floor either.
Yes, that one was a little bit debilitating. I mean, in terms of that was dispiriting, I would say. That we when you're trading for less than your cash, I feel like you're treating us like we're a drug addict. I mean, we're being treated. I think we're worth our cash. But that can be a drain, and I think that this is a challenge when you've got a really, really rich valuation. Like, that is a challenge, and that is the part of NVIDIA that I think is actually, in many ways, like the most fragile is actually not the company. I think it's the valuation. I don't know. I mean, this is not stock market advice, but I guess it is. I don't know. I'm not sure. Normally I go to my trusted financial analyst and advisor, Adam Leventhal, also my lawyer, hardware engineer,
and postmortem consultant.
And postmortem, I fired you from the postmortem. The postmortem consultant gig was super short. Adam Leventhal, postmortem lawyer, did not last very long. That turned into that was a very short.
I capitulated pretty quick.
Yeah. Well, pretty much turned into a finger pointing exercise where all the fingers pointed right at me. So that was a reference to our data center outage episode a couple weeks ago. Where, that aspect of that kind of equity aspect of the bust, I feel it was. It was very broad. It was so it kind of had happened to everybody. And I also felt like, I don't know, Adam, how you felt, because you arrived back at Sun post-apocalypse in 2001.
Yeah.
And how does it? What were some of the differences that you noticed, other than it was impossible?
The post-apocalypse. The traffic was easy. I got an apartment, no problem. So there were certainly some benefits of the bust. But you're right that the folks who were like explaining how things couldn't get lower than they were, it as someone coming in, it did all seem kind of ridiculous. It's like, why did you think that? Like, why? Like, I am just a child, so maybe you know better than I do, but like, why would that be the case? Why is there some fundamental law of gravity about the valuation here?
Right. And there is no fundamental law of valuation even about the cash you have on hand, because so much of it is your future expectations. And the future expectations for NVIDIA are obviously really, really high right now in a way that it seems impossible for them to live up to the valuation. But, who knows? I've been wrong so frequently with that company. I just, who knows?
So Todd joined us on stage, and there was one part of this in particular that I was hoping Todd would join us for, which was that the tweet mentions how Intel and AMD have competitive chips that are basically just as good and cheaper and so forth. Is that true? I mean, that doesn't seem true. Todd, what's your experience there?
Todd's like,
oh, okay. I had a question, but yeah, sure. I mean, is that true? Have you looked at the top 500 recently?
No.
I mean, so Frontier's number one. It's a big MI250X system, and they're getting performance out of MI250Xs. The software stack is not quite where it is with NVIDIA, but you can get good FP64 performance out of it. And I mean, that's been our experience on the MI300As as well.
Nice.
So yeah, I'd say, I mean, MI300 is really the first, well, that's not true. MI200 was really their first HPC competitive, like, we are serious about doing floating point chip. I mean, the capability was clearly, competitive with NVIDIA's current chips. If you look at like the flops they're offering, and MI300 is I don't know, the one where they're like, we're actually here.
right.
So yeah, I'd say they're viable. AMD in particular.
Nice.
Intel, it has been harder to get performance out of Ponte Vecchio on Aurora, which is currently number 2. They started out, and it's not clear if this is because of the GPUs or because of the network on the machine or what, but I mean, Aurora debuted on the top 500 with like half an exaflop of performance when it was supposed to get 1. Now it's slightly over 1. Their percent peak is way lower than what we're getting out of AMD chips right now. So I don't know. Intel has some catching up to do, and I don't know. We'll see what they do. They're canceling, or what? They're sunsetting Ponte Vecchio and moving on to Falcon Shores now. So and you're supposed to use Gaudi in the meantime or something like that. So I don't know. It will be interesting if they commit to a chip.
Well, but I think it's suffice it to say you've got a lot of folks that are, and AMD, probably the most viable among them, that see the same opportunity that NVIDIA sees.
Well, and they're making progress, right? Like, I mean, they have made inroads into data center GPUs, and Microsoft is deploying MI300s in Azure.
Right. And I think that like the part of what leads to the undoing of dominance is when companies believe that dominance is a birthright or will last in perpetuity. And Adam, one of the things that I felt was that when Sun was dominant, everybody felt it was due to their piece of the puzzle.
It's all because of Java 3D.
100%. 100%. I remember being so in 1997, I remember what Arthur Van Hoff telling me, every E10K that Sun sells, they sell because of Java. And I'm like, are you fucking kidding me? I mean, no, I strong disagree. He even left Sun at that point. I mean, he didn't even, and this was a younger man. I don't think I took that very well. I don't think I was invited back. I think we did not, that was a social event that was not repeated. But the Java folks thought it was due to Java. The Spark folks thought it was due to Spark. The SMCC folks thought it was due to the machine. And the Solaris folks thought the operating system folks thought it was due to the everybody kind of feels like it is. And I think this is one of the challenges of when a company is really successful, it is very, very easy to lose focus, especially at Sun. Sun lost focus when we were successful. And one of the things that always occurred to me is like kind of interesting is that I always felt, Adam, that we had we were much more focused during the trough of the bust than we were in the boom. I mean, we developed D-Trace in the bust, ZFS in the bust.
I was not there during the boom, but I would say that it felt like we had a lot of opportunity to focus, shall we say? Because like VPs and product managers who might have wanted things kind of had wandered off into areas that they thought would be more productive.
Yeah, and I remember we just had like so many dumb arguments, it felt like, during the boom, which ultimately, in kind of hindsight, boiled down to everyone believing that their piece was the piece that was the most responsible for any of Sun's success. And, we were kind of like at some level all wrong, and I guess all right in that it was this. I mean, I always felt it was the system and putting that comprehensive system that we were putting together. But I think it's really hard to, and I think one of the things that, I mean, NVIDIA, at least from the outside in, has done well is retain focus during and I think this is where like you really do have to give it, I mean, the story of NVIDIA and those acquired episodes really go into depth on it, but they had so many run-ins with true death in a way that Sun never did. Sun had one real run-in with death in 1989, and that had cast a long shadow. And it was due to some operational issues. There were there were a bunch of like issues that contributed to that. But Sun basically, as Tom, when Tom's been on here, it's kind of, and I know Tom, you're out there in the audience, you can come up on stage if you disagree. But I mean, Sun hit product market fit like straight out of the chute, and it was just, I mean, explosive. It was in the right place, right time, right team, right technology, right everything. The market was ready for it, just took off. And I mean, not to downplay, I'm sure, what felt like the risk at that time, but NVIDIA had real run-ins with like death knocking at the door.
Do you remember the anecdote about the Riva 128 from the Acquired podcast with Jensen?
Yeah, you should retell that, because that was
I loved it because they were really, really, really low on cash, and we're taping out this new chip, and basically only had the cash for one iteration, and so spent a bunch of time and money with emulation to get all the software right. And then we're of the mindset like this chip is going to be perfect. Why was the chip going to be perfect? Because it absolutely had to, or else they were dead. And then they not only did that, but doubled down, saying, okay, because we're about to tape out a perfect chip, what are we going to do next? It's like, well, we're going to build it into a system, and we're going to do all the marketing around it. And all of this predicated on this, just put all of the chips on one number and spin the wheel and hope it lands. And in the Wikipedia article, it talks about the Riva 128. It says the unofficial motto for the company today is still, our company is 30 days from going out of business. So I don't know if this is true inside or not, but certainly that is, I mean, the opposite of complacency, certainly.
The opposite of complacency. And I feel like, I mean, kudos to Amazon, same way, right? Amazon, I think, has also the retained, I mean, and I think you can argue that recently has maybe shifted at Amazon, and that was maybe more true a decade ago than it is now. But, that stuff like that stuff casts a very long shadow. And I think it's part of the reason why NVIDIA hasn't really taken their eye off the ball from an execution perspective, is because they've had these run-ins with death. And I mean, Todd, you're mentioning AMD. AMD also had run-ins with death. I mean, AMD was, I mean, I guess you've got run-ins with death, and then you have like actually was clinically dead, which I feel is more like AMD. AMD was actually like dead on the operating table.
But when do you feel like AMD was particularly dead?
Oh, no, before Naples, AMD was dead. Bulldozer was, I mean, it was dead.
So this was they were first out with the 64-bit x86. So was that Hammer?
Yes, that was right. That's right.
And that was that was a huge resurgence for them in like 2004, that kind of neighborhood.
And because Intel had misexecuted, Intel had suffering from its own problems about what, and Intel has this particular variant of misexecution is like a specialty of the house at Intel, where they're like, no, x86 is not what we are actually going to go do the grand new architecture that all software will be rewritten in. You're like, didn't you just do this with APX 432? But they did. This is IE64 and what was Merced, and was just an absolute disaster. And a very. How do you feel about VLIW? Does VLIW leave you with complicated feelings? I mean, you never had to really work on a VLIW machine.
No, I haven't.
Because VLIW is kind of like, you can view it as like the best and worst of both worlds. I'm not sure, but VLIW is basically an idea that it was kind of the wrong idea at the wrong time. And then Merced was a disaster, and McKinley, everything was going to be on McKinley. This is when I wanted Sun to name its chip that was going to be concurrent with McKinley after McKinley's assassin, Leon Zolgaz. Were you?
No, I wasn't part of that Zolgaz.
The Zolgaz
marketing campaign that you were on.
Yeah, as it turns out, like Leon Zolgaz. I mean, there's a reason that history has kind of forgotten this guy, but it's Zolgaz has got. I mean, it's a lot of consonants in that name. It's a lot of C's and Z's.
It's a good Scrabble word. Agreed.
But yeah, good Scrabble word. Not such a great, and then arguably, a bit off color. But I'm like, come on. I mean, McKinley's assassin. It's
right there.
Distant. It's in the distant past now. But they took their eye off the ball. AMD came in and did what everyone wanted them to do. We still call it AMD 64, and actually extend the x86 architecture to be 64-bit, and take away some of the register pressure, which was really acute. Get some actual registers as opposed to just having the 4 registers, whatever. I guess it was 6, and then Intel had, kind of had heard that rumor that Intel had this project Yamhill internally, where they were, and so AMD had kind of this very brief window, and then AMD misexecuted, right? And AMD had this very brief period of kind of dominance. Again, nowhere near what NVIDIA has today, but they took their eye off the ball. And this is in the, so Adam, you recall that this is on Shanghai and Barcelona, and Hypertransport did not keep up. And Barcelona, I believe it was Barcelona, was one that was really late. And Intel then had, at this point, had kind of killed i64 and proceeded to execute very well with Nehalem.
Right.
And so and then AMD is dead. By the time, fast forward 10 years, and AMD is so dead that I remember Intel presenting us a roadmap in like 2012. That was a very aggressive roadmap. And I remember telling Robert, I'm like, do they not know that AMD is dead? They are acting like, don't tell them that AMD is dead. Like, they are acting like AMD is still alive, which is kind of amazing. You think like that. That's not that long ago. Like, that's only 12 years ago when Intel,
especially in the amount of time it takes to make a chip. That's not that long ago.
Time makes make a chip. Exactly. You would think like, wow, that wasn't that long ago. Intel was so dominant that I like didn't want to tell them. I didn't want them to know how dominant they were for fear that they would stop with this very aggressive roadmap. But then Intel, and just shows how these things can change. Intel misexecuted, and you can misexecute like once or twice, but it's when you start linking misexecutions together, and they misexecuted at 10 nanometer was an absolute disaster for them. And then they misexecuted and they just totally missed chiplets. And by the time we're starting a company in 2019, for us in 2019, we're doing the analysis, and it's very clear that we're going to go all in on AMD versus Intel for x86. And at that time, I felt like it was, I don't know, Adam, because you've been kind of outside the CPU space a little bit for a couple of years, coming back in at that time, how risky did that feel?
It's so funny because I felt like I had totally missed the trough of AMD. So the fact that we were just putting those up next to each other, felt like all normal. And the fact that AMD was kind of shaking out on top also felt normal. And the fact that everyone was squinting at the spreadsheet, because there was a time when it was really clear that Intel was going to pour a ton of help into it. That we were going to get like engineering help. There was lots of support that Intel was promising. That I don't think we felt like we were going to get the same kind of support from AMD, but that everyone was squinting at it and trying to see in the spreadsheet some opportunity to work with Intel. Despite the just overwhelming numerical evidence of the strength of the AMD parts. That it was just sort of surprising, but it makes sense based on folks' history.
When it just can show you that, like, in a very small number of generations, things can really, really flip. And we had some advisors of the company in 2019 who were like, "You are making a mistake by betting on AMD." And the world, like, of course, AMD is not going to out execute Intel, but that's exactly what's happened in the last 5 years, right? And you'd be very hard pressed to argue that x86, that Intel x86 is dominant right now, and really AMD x86 is really much more dominant. And there's been, so I mean, which is kind of amazing how quickly you can like rise and fall and rise and fall and rise and fall again. In fact, you actually missed. I mean, you missed AMD being dead on the operating table.
Exactly.
Like wow, everyone's waiting for the
right.
person's alive. I'm not sure why.
Just look away for a decade, and all of a sudden, right?
Right, exactly. And which I think does show you that, like, we talk with you kind of getting back to NVIDIA's dominance. It does feel very dumb, but just to Todd's point about, AMD really chipping away there. And it require, if NVIDIA NVIDIA will be deprived of margin to misexecute is kind of the way I would phrase it.
Yeah.
And if you do misexecute, you've got a bunch of folks that are going to pounce. And certainly that's felt like happened to Microsoft, which had been so dominant, and then did misexecute. They pretty grievously misexecuted they misexecuted on a bunch of things. They misexecuted for sure on Unix and Linux and open source. And I mean, even as late as 2012, the fact that you could run Linux guests in Azure was something that was not made available to the public. It was like a secret inside of Microsoft. And it was really with the departure of Ballmer that they could kind of enter a new era, which has been very important for them. And it just showed that, like, you can't count these companies out either. So that we've got in terms of like what the future may hold for NVIDIA, it's going to be it's hard to imagine that NVIDIA stays this dominant in perpetuity.
So,
I think.
So I'm with you. I mean, I think that seems right. I mean, I think that is sort of a safe bet, given that they're like at what seems like a real peak, and yet CUDA seems like such a huge moat. In a moat that, like, we talked about Sun was never as dominant. Part of the reason why it didn't feel as dominant is I don't think that the switching costs ever felt as high. Whereas what we've heard in the market over and over again is how pervasive and useful and good CUDA is, and how people wish ROCm were better.
But to Todd's point, this thing being used heavily at Microsoft, heavily at elsewhere. There are a lot of reasons for the software to improve, but it's like, is the software going to get there? I do kind of wonder if the AMD's approach. I think this is. I also think is a reason why NVIDIA may become a misexecution for NVIDIA. They are very, very proprietary, and it does kind of like it's almost as if x86 only supported Windows. If you can imagine that world for a moment, where a world that didn't exist, but if you can imagine where in order to run an x86 chip, you had to run Windows, and it would have been a different world. And I think it would have extended the dominance at some level of Microsoft, but it also would have, when it collapsed, it would have collapsed more completely, because ultimately it was the fact that x86 was an open architecture. I mean, open, I guess, in air quotes, but the fact that you could put other software stacks on top of x86, that you were not that Intel was very deliberately not forcing you into software choices, even like, CUDA, you can argue is a good one, but the fact that you had that flexibility. So I think the fact that the proprietariness of NVIDIA, I think, is a challenge for them, and is a potential area of misexecution.
Yeah, it's interesting because it does. We have seen, at least in my career, this fight against proprietary components, and how it may take a while, but the market finds a way to route around some of these things. And you're right that it does potentially set up maybe even like a Sun-like hurdle. I mean, keep in mind, we had a proprietary CPU, proprietary operating system. We were, always,
right.
I mean, we were more open than NVIDIA, but there was a lot proprietary about us, even until, Open Solaris in 2003 or whenever it was, 2004.
2005. No, 2005.
There we go.
Too late.
Yeah,
too
much
late.
too late. Much too late.
I mean, because I think you kind of get into the power game of like, I think that Sun's proprietariness, despite the fact that Bing was born as the open systems company, I think it was proprietary far too long. And I think that if we'd open sourced the operating system in like 98, I think I don't know, did different things happen.
Certainly. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, would have been different. So I that's something I definitely wonder about. One of the questions was, what was the signal that we saw in Oxide that about AMD to make the bet? And this is we were not splitting the atom here. This is really clear. If you just
power in, instructions out, it was very, very clear.
Yeah, if we looked at like the things we cared about were things like power, performance, thread count, clock speed, and on more or less every and then cost, and on every one of those axes, there was just no comparison. We should actually, I wonder if should we open RFD12? I need to go read RFD12.
I'm sure it's filled with proprietary information.
I know that it is filled with proprietary information. The RFD12 was the RFD that we had that went into this analysis. I'm more concerned that it's filled with invective. I actually, as someone who may have contributed some punchy lines to RFD12.
Probably a healthy blend of both proprietary information and invective.
That's right. Right. It is. I come for the proprietary information, stay for the invective. But that's, just the low number denotes how, this was an early decision for us. We wanted to make sure we were right. And it was just very clear. And the thing that I didn't realize until we were talking to Intel was that Intel had been anti-chiplet. That was a huge surprise. Because I'd like, okay, they're anti-chiplet. And they had this tiled architecture. And it was just very clear that the chiplet architecture was the right architecture. I don't see, and obviously the GPU is not the domain of expertise. But I don't see NVIDIA making mistakes like that. I do wonder. So Adam, another thing to put in front of you, you and I talk. I know we've talked in the past about, because the moment was so kind of catalytic for both of us when I think as an intern, right? When we had just seen the price tag on a Serengeti system, and you're like, wow, $800,000 for an 8 CPU machine. Like, why would I not buy like 8,000 to 1 CPU machines? I'm like, I don't know. That's a good question.
I don't know. I'm sure someone's thought of it, and whatever.
Yeah, I don't know. Someone else. I don't know. I think they tell me the stock's going to double in value, so I'm pretty sure that's the case.
That's
so,
right.
Anyway, let's go on.
Regardless of what the value is and the initial option, doesn't make sense to me, but
yeah, it makes sense to someone. And of course, like as it turns out, through the out of the mouth of babes, like, oh my God, we were right. I do really wonder about, and obviously we had that terrific episode and conversation with Simon Wilson about the acquisition of Mellanox by NVIDIA is so strategic with respect to understanding the importance of very low latency networking to do this kind of massive training, because these models are so large. And it feels like there's going to be a lot of economic pressure on finding, it's certainly on the inference side. It's like, can we just get these things? Can we get the ultra high speed networking out of the picture? Is there a way to make these models small enough to live in either HBM or DRAM? And you wonder if the economics, because I do feel like the economics of Sun servers coupled with the bust forced companies like Google to do something else. Google could not have been built on, Google had to be built on something cheaper. And Google could not have been built on Windows. Google had to have been built on open source software because they just didn't have, the resources in the early 2000s. And you do wonder if in this regard, like an AI bust could be super interesting, because you could have, not because it would wipe out companies, but it would just make companies much more focused on I got to run on whatever I can get. And I'm actually I care a lot more about price performance than I do maybe today. And I think that's another potential point of vulnerability.
Interesting. I mean, even the scarcity may be a point of vulnerability because it
Right.
is forcing folks to invest more both in alternatives and in these kinds of interposition layers where you're not committed to one architecture or another,
Yes.
just by the necessity of the NVIDIA chips being complete unobtainium.
Okay, so to make a crazy analogy, I think that there was an era of absolute dominance of AWS. And I say AWS less dominant than they were, say, in 2014.
Okay.
That's hot take number one. I'm not sure if the
go on.
hot take number
maybe
two,
there are other alternatives, but it does feel like they are still almost synonymous with public cloud. But
yes, they are. But like we have run into plenty of GCP and Azure customers.
Yeah, even Oracle Cloud customers.
Come on.
No, really.
This is not a comedy hour. This is who's an Oracle Cloud customer? Name 10.
I can't name 10 publicly.
Okay then. Okay. We got Oracle Cloud. You're just trying to a list doesn't need to have 4 things on it. It can just have 3 things on it.
Okay.
You don't need to
Perfect.
flesh out
GCP,
the list.
Oracle, Linode, right.
Yeah, this is I've tried really hard to resist being trolled by this tweet. It's I've tried very hard. Come on. But we see a lot. There's just, and I think so. Hot take number 2 is that the rise of Kubernetes tracks that to a degree.
Interesting, because it makes it less. The specific choice becomes less relevant. You're getting more abstraction between you and the infrastructure provider.
Well, and I'm not sure that this is correlation or causation. I think this may just be correlation. I think a lot of the energy behind Kubernetes was people having energy for not being so beholden to AWS. And at I would love to get the others takes on my hot take, but that's the I think that AWS became marginal. I mean, it's obviously still wildly successful and still dominant, but it did not. There was an era where it had all the oxygen in the room. And when Adrian Cockcroft is talking about how you got to build on, everything needs to be built on every new, they would announce a new service and everyone would say you have to build on this new service. Everything has to be built on this new service. It feels like that's not the era that we're.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think you're right. It's there's a reInvent where there's 18,000 new services.
Right.
And it is not if you don't do this, you will be behind. You're right. I agree.
That's right. And it felt like that was true for a stretch of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's right. I agree with that.
Where it's oh God, we had to and okay, now I got to use Kinesis, or now I've got to use, Greengrass, or, Fargate, or,
Yes.
There was we've got to get Corey on here. Corey could be come on, what's guy we could do? He could best us both on
rattling off the obscure AWS services.
The obscure AWS services, that's to their credit, they never seem to turn off. I really admire that about AWS. They support everything in perpetuity.
Yeah.
But you wonder if and I think that is ultimately the companies lose their dominance because they become arrogant and at some level, and because they view it as their birthright. And I think Sun, I don't know if it was quite as, I think it was arrogance for sure. And then I think it was just also just losing track of no longer losing some of that hunger, losing some of that kind of connection with why someone would buy the product or why they would buy the product, losing some of that connection with the customer, not seeing some of these other economic pressures. I think that's what leads to the demise of these things. And then, the demise seems, as high expectations on the upside will make up for tons of defects, right? You can paper over a lot of things when people just kind of assume that you're going to, on everything, you're going to get there if you're not there yet. When the whole narrative flips, it doesn't seem to matter how much great stuff you're doing, because you're actually, the narrative is flipped. And and it's it can be really, really hard, I think. Obviously NVIDIA's a long way from that, because again, they continue to execute very, very well. So I think that that's the bit that, and then I will say the final bit of history that is the misread that is not correct is Sun's crash after the dot-com bubble bust. After the bust, that is not what led to the demise of Sun. I don't think.
I mean, it didn't help.
It didn't help.
So, what do you think?
Adam Leventhal, CFO.
Yeah, I'm just saying. What do you think was more on the scene there?
Well, I don't think it helped. Obviously, it didn't help. But I think that like Sun could have etched a path that was Cisco, for example. Sun did not need to die with the .com bust. We were not we were not Webvan. It's not like we evaporated overnight. I mean, Sun was acquired by Oracle in 2010, long after the .com bust.
Yeah.
So
I don't want to put it all on Jonathan Schwartz's shoulders, but it did seem like there was a continuity problem where, I'm not sure that Scott had done Scott McNealy, founding or CEO of Sun. I'm not sure he had done the things that needed to be done to change the culture to adapt post the .com boom, the bust rather. But when you talk about regarding success as a birthright, that felt more like the Jonathan era without ever figuring out what we needed to be different.
Well, and I think that this is always a challenge for when a company is no longer founder led. It's very easy to lose its way.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly what I was thinking as you think about NVIDIA, which is, I mean, I'm sure Jensen is a long way from handing off the reins to anyone, but that's going to be a real inflection point.
That's going to be an inflection point. And I think, it's sometimes that's needed. I think like getting Ballmer out of Microsoft was actually needed for Microsoft to be able to regain relevance. But Ballmer's not a founder also. And, it feels like Amazon has done pretty well in the post-Bezos era, but I would point out that like the end of Amazon's total dominance is in the departure of Bezos. And, I definitely feel that, I mean, the departure of Intel's founders and then I think, I mean, Andy Grove, the Andy Grove is Andy Grove just very early Intel?
I'm not sure.
But so much of the culture, I guess the very early, I know that he was at Fairchild before going to Intel, but so I mean super early Intel, right? And the kind of the zeitgeist of Intel really shifted after Andy Grove. Was very important for that kind of just staying relentless and hungry when a company is dominant is a real challenge. And I think that it is really hard when you've got kind of an inherited company, and often when you're past. And so I agree with you. I think that like even though there were lots of things that I personally liked about Jonathan, I think that he was not in the right spot. And I think that if McNealy, and I mean, hey, like the guy's been running the company it's like the guy's got the right to be like, hey, I kind of want to go off and do something else at this point. And but ultimately he had to come back as chairman, and it was a mess. And you got, I mean, someone in the chat is also talking about, that founder-led companies can also flounder. Founder-led is not the right answer. And Steve Jobs, I mean, Jobs is so interesting, right? Because Jobs just kind of shows you whatever you want to see in that founder arc. Because on the one hand, what was forced out of Apple, and on the other hand, like there is, I mean, surely it is not a hot or controversial take that if Jobs does not return to Apple, Apple does not return to dominance.
Yeah, not controversial at all. And a throwback to one of our earliest episodes about Steve Jobs and the next thing.
Big thing.
Was it next big thing? Right.
Steve Jobs and the next big thing. That is such a good book.
It was a great book. I mean, really dispelled a lot of the mythology around Steve Jobs.
In part because it's written at the trough.
Yes.
I think it just shows you, and because I do think that, like, again, we love the acquired episodes, and there are 3 or 4 episodes that Acquired did about NVIDIA. They did a multi-parter on NVIDIA.
Yeah.
And if you listen to the last one, it's either the 3rd or the 4th one. The only
one I've listened to is the one with Jensen.
Oh. Yeah. The last one is like, okay, God, someone like turn on the lights in here. These guys, someone hose these guys down. This is just like this is just too much. I mean, come on, guys. This is not. I mean, because they're saying things like, CUDA's got like a 10,000-year lead. I mean, and like when you start thinking about that, it's like, come on. No technology. Like now you're beginning to sow the seeds, plant the seeds of actually the erosion of dominance. Is like, like God forbid anyone in NVIDIA hear this and get that kind of inherited arrogance, because you don't have that. Like that kind of a lead doesn't exist. And it's easy to denigrate, AMD's ROCm or what have you, but the idea that like it is tautologically impossible for AMD to surpass NVIDIA is not correct. And that would be in the chat. There's a bit of debate about whether to lose faith in Gelsinger or not. Returning to Intel, I would say that the Gelsinger was the heralded return of the engineer to Intel, and let's just say the results have been underwhelming.
Yeah.
But it goes to show you like how these things. I think it is also important. And Adam, I don't know if your perspective on this has kind of changed over the years, but it especially when you're new to the industry, it feels like everything feels so intransigent at some point, and then you begin to learn like actually everything is actually nothing is totally immutable, and things absolutely do change over time. It's what makes this industry interesting, and giants do actually fall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the fact that in our careers we saw like the rise of Facebook, of Meta, right? Like I don't know, just like these companies that I was using Google as an intern at Microsoft in 1999 as this like weird search engine or whatever. To think it was not that long ago that these things that we think of as just pillars were absolutely nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah.
And then also some of the things that we thought of as being absolutely dominant and impossible. Like certainly I felt that way with Microsoft and Windows. It felt that way with proprietary systems. It felt that way at so many junctures. It felt like this thing is so dominant, nothing will ever erode it. And then all of a sudden you wake up and it's like, wait a minute, like that we ever thought that was dominant? And I think it's that one of the things that kind of came up online a little bit, but we've got our logos in the Oxide office that are echoes of past logos that I love. We've got a couple of kind of trivia questions in there. I won't spoil it in case you're in the Oxide office. But one that, so we have one, for example, one that is pretty clear is an Oxide logo in the form of a Commodore logo, which I think is pretty great. But have you, and I don't know, have you had the pleasure of kind of showing this wall to people?
No, more just like watching you do it, but that's sort of pleasurable as well.
Okay, so maybe you got your own little bingo on Lee. But it's amazing to me. So we've got an Oxide logo in the style of the DEC logo. And that one's like a generational marker. And if you are younger than a certain age, you do not recognize it at all. And which to me is kind of shocking because DEC was so dominant for an extended period of time. IBM was so dominant for an extended period of time. And these things do change over time. And but it ultimately, like, companies take and it's important, right? I also feel that like that is a service to innovation. We don't want to be locked into these things forever, and it's a service to innovation where these companies either, like, I think it was a tremendous service to innovation that Microsoft was forced to really change to research, right? Where Microsoft was a real problem for a long period of time and is now like not a problem at all. Are you uncomfortable with that, by the way? With like this new,
it's weird, right? It's weird, especially because I grew up like as like a 8-year-old subscribing to Mac User magazine, so like feeling angry feelings about Microsoft, just like innately.
You were like a child warrior in the
exactly.
You were what they taught you at a very young age to
that's right. But totally. But then to say there's I was at an API conference where I was hanging out with a bunch of folks from Microsoft who were doing things that are like right up my alley. and we're doing it all in the open, and wanting to talk about it and collaborate. It's weird. It's weird. It makes me feel uncomfortable.
Yeah, it is weird. And
Great.
it is the fact that, well, so this was hit home for me when we, I want to say like 2017, we had a candidate that was coming out of college and was looking at, and this is at the time Joyent versus Microsoft versus Facebook. And he decides to go to Facebook. And my attitude is, at least it wasn't Microsoft. At least I don't have to at least I can respect him as a human being. And the younger engineers are like, what are you talking about?
You're out of your mind. It's the
you're
opposite.
Out of your mind. Like, I am furious with him for going to Microsoft. Like, what's wrong with Microsoft? You definitely should go. At least at Microsoft, you can you can at least
you're not undermining democracy. Right?
You're not undermining democracy. You're not. And I'm like, what is going on? And this would be this is in early 2017, and because that's it would have been the summer of 2017, and it was kind of the light going on for me that Facebook and the younger engineers were of course much more on this than I was, and realizing that Facebook has kind of lost its way. Facebook has become that for Facebook had kind of taken on the mantle of villainy that Microsoft had, and now Microsoft is I mean, both of them earned it. Microsoft earned their much better reputation because they've done a lot that's been in service of innovation and that has also helped the company, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch this whole thing unfold. And we're very curious. I think people know this. I don't think we've kept it a secret that we are very interested in what an accelerated compute product looks like. But I think we also haven't kept it a secret that we've got to find a way we can do that in a way that delivers real oxide value. And this is where you get to the challenges of NVIDIA are around this proprietariness. It makes it really hard for us to deliver the kind of system that we want to go deliver. And, I kind of believe that Intel x86, the company could be really successful and be a lot more open. But I don't know. But also why would NVIDIA care about what I think? It's let's take your advice.
Yeah.
Sorry, did you mention 98% of the value of some Microsoft was lost under your tenure? Why don't you take
I turned off after you said that, right?
Exactly. You sold for less than its cash, right? Okay, yeah, let's do what you say. This is now I'm channeling my 17-year-old.
It does seem like it's particularly tough to have that kind of insightfulness or that kind of soul searching when you're at your peak to say, how do we prevent the next generation, or how do we maintain that dominance past this next generation? How do we keep the early upstarts from even getting started? Actually, this is something that Amazon has done incredibly well at, despite perhaps, if you're right, that the loss in dominance. But I think that they've always been focused on how they how they kind of maintain that dominance generationally.
For sure. And Amazon, the other thing that Amazon has, the other thing that I think is you get this loss of dominance when you also take your eye off of your customers, when what you're delivering to your customers. And Amazon's always done a good job of delivering value to their customers and understanding their own customers. That's what IBM lost track of their customers. Sun lost track of their customers. The companies that have lost that dominance, Microsoft absolutely lost track of their customers because they were coercive with respect to their customers. And I think NVIDIA seems to be pretty focused on their customers right now. It's part of their executing well, right? They seem they're delivering things that people want. So
agreed, but it seems like they're also focused on a model of renting, not owning, and of full system delivery. Yeah. And will that continue to be what customers want? And will they be able to hear when it's not, or will they be insulated from that in a way that I think Sun was? Maybe now I'm making this tweet's point, but Sun was insulated from hearing the complaints from customers, and by the time we did, it was too late.
Okay, so this is, I think, going to be the big challenge for NVIDIA. Is I do think this is where the valuation comes into confluence of this, where you kind of need to ignore the valuation. And this is something that I always thought like Google and Amazon were very good at, especially in their earlier days, of like, no, like we are going to do things that you, the market, may disagree with, that we think are in our long-term interests. And I think when the valuation gets to $2.9 trillion, it is harder to tell the market of like, no, look, here are the things that we need. Like, I know what you want us to do is turn into a private equity shop and only rent the GPUs, but we will be planting the seeds we'll be undermining our own dominance by doing that. Ultimately, in the limit, we will be more extractive, but ultimately we will lose our dominance if we do that. And that's the knife edge that they've got to go walk. And then they also need to stay focused, which I kind of get the sense that they are. I don't get the sense that they, because many companies, Sun included, just get high on their own farts and just completely lose focus. I mean, God, any SGI alum would be like, oh my God. I mean, SGI's like rise and fall was so quick. And that like it was a very brief period of time of dominance, but they completely lost focus. And then the wheels came off surprisingly quickly.
And I think arguably hastened by NVIDIA, right? Like hastened by the commodity market around graphics.
For sure, hastened, and also like what the kind of the rents that you were seeking, charging, being able to extract were not going to happen going forward. Like there were structural changes that were, and that would be an interesting moment. Again, but NVIDIA's had so many brushes with death that I think that they are in probably better shape to do that. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to watch. So I mean, I think that it's reasonable to believe that this level of dominance will not last forever. But it's also reasonable to believe that it's not going to end tomorrow. I don't know. Yeah. How's that for a hot take?
Yeah.
Well, like, why am I? I'm sorry.
You're saying the weather today will probably be the same as the weather tomorrow? I guess that's an impressive prediction.
That's great. Well, this was fun to tune into. That was really great. I understand that sounds like kind of a bit of a milk toast take, but I think I don't know. Less complicated. That's where we are. What do you want from us? You know.
There we go. We're simple people.
We're simple people. Hey, you know what? We read the tweet, folks. You can't. We just
whole thing.
We read the whole thing. We did it without resorting to mocking voice. I mean, I feel like we've made some strides here. We've made some strides here.
It's good progress.
And Todd had a question for us and then evaporated. So maybe Todd was just like, you know what? Forget these two jackasses. I don't know. They're just gonna. So sorry, Todd. But well, it'll be interesting to watch. This is a space that we're keeping, I think, continue to keep a very keen eye on. Super important. It continues to be important. There's a lot of there. So it's going to be interesting to watch.
Absolutely.
And I think that and also this read of history is definitely bizarre and incorrect. That's my other conclusion is that this tweet did tremendous numbers from this guy. 7.2 thousand likes.
Maybe that's the win. Maybe he's just trying to launch 1,000 podcast episodes about his tweet.
Maybe that's it. I know it's bait. I'm sorry. We chomped down on the bait. I would say that I tried my best to resist, but then I'd be lying to us all. And
I think that was your best, actually.
You know what? You think that I've got higher expectations I don't have high expectations for you. I've got low expectations for you. All right. Well, I'd like to think that I've got higher expectations for myself, but here we are.
That's good.
We are off next week, Adam. You've got a
out of town.
And so it's still sporadic here with respect to various summer vacations and so on. But we will have everyone back in 2 weeks. All right. Hey, thanks, Adam. Thanks for that. Thanks for indulging me on.
No, this is great. I enjoyed it.
All right. Take care, everyone.